Millwrights, Tom Lutz. Vice Chairman and Chief Administrative Officer for DTE Energy, David E. Meador. The Vice President of Economic Community and College Development for Washtenaw Community College, Michelle Mueller. Chief Executive Officer of the National Skills Coalition, Andy Van Kleunen. And to moderate the discussion, please welcome host of Detroit Public Television and WDET 101.9 FM, Stephen Henderson.
Okay, so this is to me the topic in the city of Detroit and throughout much of the state of Michigan. This idea of how we get people ready for opportunities for work. We all just heard the mayor in his speech talk about how critical this is, talk about unemployment, his focus on unemployment, and the things that we need to do to make sure that people who want to work, who need to work, not only have jobs that they can go apply for, but have the skills that qualify them for those jobs and don't have other barriers that are in the way. So I think this will be a really timely and important discussion about how we do that in the city of Detroit and in the state. You've met our panelists so far, and I'm going to start with each of them talking about from their perspective what the barriers are that prevent more workers with the right skills being available to fill jobs when they become open. Tom, I'll start with you.
So from the skilled trades perspective, and we continue to struggle with the amount of people that it takes to fill a job. Our contractors constantly tell us that it's 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 to 1 to get one good candidate. So we work closely with our contractors and our associations around the state, and we've developed a curriculum to prepare students for our apprenticeship programs. And we have employed that as early as 9th grade. It's a program called Career Connections, and it starts out with many careers, one trade, and then works into theoretical math programs, and then develops into project books, which kind of feel like woodshop classes, and then construction-based, both residential and commercial. And what this does is overcomes the traditional preparation, the lacking of that traditional preparation for people for skilled trades. You know, the math is super important to us. Today's technology allows us to implement that in new training techniques, but we still need people that walk through the door understanding what jobs and skilled trades look like. So that's the primary hurdle we see is just people not being prepared. And you know, combine that with access. And again, that's just being where they are and being open and available to implementing the hurdles, whether it's educational or transportation or skills, to get them in the door, prepare them to be success in our training programs.
Dave, you're wearing a couple hats up here. You are one of the executives at DTE, but you also co-chair the Mayor's Workforce Development Board. What are the things that are in our way?
Well, thank you, Stephen. When we got started on this several years ago, and Jeff Donofrio's here, he actually heads us up for the mayor, learned a lot from Jeff. So when we got started, we looked at comparable cities to say if we had the right level of employment, how many people would we have to put to work, and the number was daunting. It took my breath away, at least. It was 100,000 people we had to put to work. And we started studying the workforce system, and I think even to call it a workforce system is giving it too much credit because there was no system. There's 400 some agencies doing training and development on the supply side, and on the demand side, employers can't find labor. So, you know, kind of the rule of thumb was if you need 300 people, go interview 1,000. That doesn't change the system, and what we have been working to do is to intervene at a systems level to change the system, including identifying barriers and removing the barriers to employment, which has been a big part of the job. So eliminating driver responsibility fees would be one example of that. Another one is expungement and helping those that are coming out of prison actually, you know, get over some of the barriers to their first interview and then their first job. Where we have found success is trying to dismantle the system and then, as I describe it, rewire it. Get a commitment from an employer for several hundred jobs, then work with Jeff and the team to identify people, train them, place them, and then in many cases put in wraparound services.
Michelle?
Well, I think that we have a lot of the same issues as business and industry with regard to education. So there are a couple facts. First of all, high school enrollment will continue to go down through the year 2035, and the competition for those students will increase heavily among colleges and universities because they're going to have to fill those dorm rooms. A number of the students, even though they're decreased numbers from K-12, a number of those students that are going through the system have no idea and are overwhelmed by what opportunities are available to them for the workforce. So a lot of times when we get them at the community college, and let's face it folks, the community college is democracy's college. Anybody can come in. You have a high school diploma or GED, you're coming into the community college, and we were developed to be there to produce the local workforce around this country. And we do a really great job at it. But we have to work with the folks as they're coming to us, and we're finding that a number of students, even with high school diplomas, can't read at the college level. They do not have the math skills that they need at the algebra level. These are real problems that we have to face, and it takes us time to remediate those students and the money that it costs to remediate the students. The other thing that happens is that students now we can either fix the immigration law, and it doesn't sound like that's happening too soon if you've been watching what's going on the border, et cetera. So if we don't fix the immigration law, where are we going to get these additional people from if high school enrollment's going down? This is community development, folks. This is a community development project because we have to work with those that are less fortunate to be able to bring them back onto the employment rosters. And it is a serious problem as it relates to wraparound services. At Washtenaw Community College, we have the money through our foundation and through resources for tuition. Tuition isn't the problem. The problem is the wraparound services, paying for the transportation, paying for the child care, paying for food insecurity. We have a food pantry on our campus for the first time, filled with food for people. It's an incredible problem. And the transportation issue, just for folks to be able not only to get to the community college and to be able to take classes, but it's the issue related to even getting to the job to be able to report to work every day. These are serious community development issues. And I think if we're looking to solve the problem, we've got to start thinking about it from a systems perspective, not from silos anymore. Separate funding silos, it doesn't work anymore. It's gone forever. We've got to think about systems thinking.
Andy?
Thanks, Stephen. And first, I should say thank you to the Wilson Foundation for inviting me, and thanks to everybody here in Michigan, so I'm the one non-Michigander on the panel. But I've spent a lot of time in Michigan over the past 20 years running a national organization that is trying to change the rules for who gets a chance to succeed in this country, and particularly looking at the workforce and education and other policies that we have both in Washington and also in states around the country. And we work with a lot of the perspectives of folks who are represented up here. So business leaders, labor leaders, community colleges, community organizations, anti-poverty advocates, workforce development experts, all trying to figure out like how is it that we can kind of get these systems that folks are talking about better aligned on the needs of today's workers and our future workers and the needs of local industry. And so we've learned a lot over the eras of time that we've spent here in Michigan about things about stakeholders like these folks up here have worked together and the policies that have been implemented at both the local level and at the state level. And I think this is a particularly exciting era for the state of Michigan, both under the Whitmer administration and I think a number of things that elected representatives from the state are trying to do in Washington to move some of these issues. But just to reiterate some of the things that the other panelists have already said, jobs are requiring more skills, even entry-level jobs are requiring more skills, both technical and these kind of reading and math and digital literacy skills. Our education and workforce systems have not been able to pivot quickly enough to respond to those particular needs. We've had some institutional resistance to changing how it is that we've educated folks for the past 20 or 30 years, and I think that there's some real desire to see some of that shift. We've assumed that industry was going to solve this problem on their own, and I think industry is doing a lot. But there's a lot of small and medium-sized companies for whom, if they don't have a good working partnership with their local high school or college or labor union or others, like they're not going to be able to solve this on their own. And we have not created a policy environment, I think, in this country, although I think there's some really interesting things happening here in the state, but at least in this country, we've not created a policy environment that's made it easy for small companies that are hiring a couple people to sit down at the table with larger companies to figure out as an industry how it is that we're going to both build that pipeline of people coming to these open jobs, but also what are we going to do for 60+% of those jobs are going to change significantly over the next 10 years or so with digitalization and automation and artificial intelligence. We have no national strategy for how we're going to do that, and we're going to be looking to states like Michigan to figure out how we can help those currently employed folks as well as how it is we can get people into the currently available jobs.
I'm going to stick with you for a second, Andy. You said that you feel like there are some things that are happening in this state to make it easier for small businesses and big businesses to work together across industry. Can you tell us what those things are, and then also tell us what else we need to be doing?
Well, I think this idea of industry partnerships or sector partnerships or regional skill alliances, there's been a number of different terms that have been used both here in the state and around the country, but how is it that we can get everybody who has a stake in making an industry competitive today and into the future? So a range of firms as well as the colleges and the high schools and labor unions for unionized sectors and what have you. How is it we can kind of plan together what are the jobs that everybody's having a hard time filling? Can we get competitors to agree on, while we all have our own companies and we all have our particular needs, basically what are some common skill standards or credential expectations that we have that we can all be training people to? And then we should then be making sure that we use public dollars only for those programs that are training people to that spec that is meeting the need of industry. That's better for the people who are taking the programs to have some level of confidence that they actually have a decent chance of getting a job once they get out of that program. And you are seeing this happening in other parts of the country. There's 30+ states that are using some version of this industry or sector partnership approach. We just think it needs to be ramped up much higher to not just be paying attention to the labor agency or workforce development programs, but it should be driving what we're doing in our community colleges, in our high schools where we have career and tech ed programs, and that's been something that I think is going to be where we're looking to what might be done here in Michigan as an area where we think there could be some promise shown.
Michelle, you were talking about the wraparound services, this idea that you can't just open the doors and say, well, the opportunity's there, take advantage of it. You've really got to give people support. But that kind of reminds me of a discussion that I think we haven't had enough of, which is how much we're asking of, for instance, higher ed institutions. I mean, you are a college and you are supposed to be focused on giving people academic preparation and support. Here you are running a food pantry. Are we asking too much? Is there a better way for us to approach this that would take pressure off of Washtenaw Community College and others to be doing things that aren't their core mission and that you probably don't have the funding, at least from the state, to pursue?
There's definitely a better way, and I'm going to talk about a really innovative way to do this, but it won't be innovative for business and industry. We talked to someone who runs an IT company in Ann Arbor, and we said, imagine if all day long a person could go, how many of you have used TurboTax in the room? How many of you have used it? Okay. So you know how easy it is to use, right? It's machine learning, it's intuitive, it stops you when you say no, it moves you on when you say yes. Imagine if an IT company came along and disrupted the whole thing and used Lean and Six Sigma, and we already know what the formula is based on when dollars are doled out, what the rules are for doling dollars out at the state, at the federal level, and at the local level. Imagine if there was something where an application was built and you could answer questions related to that related to things for the GI Bill, things related to Michigan Rehab, things related to WIOA funding, things related to Pell Grants, et cetera. Imagine if you could fill that all out and if it could package the dollars for you. And it took it out of the hands of us in silos, but the packaging happened up here. We would probably have tremendous efficiency with the way that we utilized our dollars better instead of duplicating services, duplicating funding, etc. And that at least gives us a better place to start with someone that we're sitting down face to face with, and we're moving them through what it is, the advising towards what they want to do, what they may like to do. That would be a first step. And maybe rather than creating more money, because we're not going to print any more money, right? Unless they find the gold. I think it's in Traverse City, the Civil War gold. Have you all been watching that show? That's in Lake Michigan? Okay. So if you watch the History Channel, you'll find that out. So basically, lack of printing money, right? How do we utilize the money we have already to be able to create social impact from being able to use the funding that's there, right? How do we use that money? The only way to do it is to package. Now, you can't tell me we can't do it because community colleges and universities have been packaging financial aid for years. We package federal funds based on rules. We package state funds based on rules. We package scholarships based on rules. So why can't we do it at the state level? Why can't we do it, the packaging that way?
But, you know, one of the questions is also, you get these support services at the college level. Those graduates then have to figure out all those things for the workplace too, right? Transportation, how you get to work,
Stephen,
how you get someone to watch your kids while you're at work. I mean,
Absolutely.
It never ends.
You're so right. Bill Slate and I from Southeast Michigan Works sat down and I said, listen, Bill, let's put a training model together with your employer resource network. So you're doing wraparound services to be able to help employers that are hiring folks that may be coming into entry-level jobs and may be having difficulties with transportation and all those social barriers because they're dealing with the same thing. And we're dealing with wraparound services and folks to get success coaching. Let's marry the two models together so that way we don't finish training them and we've helped them to overcome some of those barriers and then we just drop them off and say good luck in the workforce. Let's try to continue that pattern through so we can get them into financial literacy at that point, get them some life coaching, training, et cetera, to be able to set them up to be successful as we move them down the line and hopefully up the career ladder. Because let's face it, the more training they get, the better it is for them, right? They'll make more money.
Dave, we have some practical examples of how this plays out in the city of Detroit unfolding right now. Talk about the new opportunities that are unfolding because of what FCA has decided it wants to do with the Jefferson plant, and talk about what you're seeing in terms of the gap that might exist between those jobs and the people who might want them, but also give us a sense of just how dramatically these jobs are needed, how interested people in the city have been in this whole development.
Sure. Well, you know, in the city, when we started working on workforce development, half of the adults were not participating in the workforce. So employment, unemployment numbers mask a much bigger issue. We also know, Detroit's one of the poorest cities of its size in the country. We also have the highest number of single moms of a city of this nature in the country. So the deep systemic issues are there. People want to work. The entry-level jobs are not in the city for the most part. They're in the suburbs. We also don't have regional transit fixed, which we have to take that issue on also. But what we are seeing is that people want to work. They're hungry for work. Navigating the system to get to that job is not always the easiest thing to do. So, we have had examples already with economic development, bringing the right types of jobs to Detroit with Sakti Automotive and Flexingate, where we were able to go to work, employing Detroiters with multiple barriers, including a high percentage of returning citizens, and then not only helping them find a job, but to the employers find a source of very dedicated, very loyal, very productive employees. And now the big opportunity here is with FCA and the assembly plant that's coming with 6,500 direct jobs, but if you look at the multiplier effect with the supply base, this will be tens of thousands of jobs. But just to show you an indication of how hungry people are, there was a website open up where people could express interest for the 6,500 jobs, and every time I checked, the number's gone up. It's over 22,000 now that have expressed interest for 6,500 jobs. What we want to do is get 6,500 people to work and then go work on the remainder because there will be more opportunity. So our thinking is that, again, if you just left all of this to chance, it's not going to change the system. I think what we have learned is you have to be very thoughtful and directive as how you're going to do your work. Whether it be working with returning citizens, working with people with disabilities, someone has to stand up and say, we need to intervene in a different way to make things happen.
And you were talking earlier before we started about this idea of reverse engineering, right? Taking a look at when these jobs will be available, what they will ask of the people who apply, and then sort of gaming it out to make sure that we're doing the things that we need to get people ready.
Right. The deal had not even been announced, and we already started talking to Chrysler's Human Resources groups about if they can tell us number of people, skill sets, and dates, then we can work backwards and reverse engineer and make sure that the individuals are trained and ready for the job. And along that line, if not that job, another job. There are already pending announcements that are going to come through about suppliers that are going to come in Detroit because of that plant. One of them, as an example, will be 600 jobs right in the heart of the city. Requirement is a high school diploma. And what I love about it, too, there's about moving jobs from Mexico to Detroit and giving us a shot at putting Detroiters to work.
So this issue has become pretty personal for me as well over the last couple of years because I've gone back to the neighborhood where I was born in Detroit on the near west side and started a nonprofit in the house that my family lived in when I was born. It's a literary arts and community center called the Tuxedo Project because the street it's on is Tuxedo. And as I've gone back there and gotten reacquainted with the neighborhood and our neighbors, this issue has come up over and over and over again. The number of people who aren't working on the block, the number of people who face food insecurity and water insecurity and all these other kinds of things because they don't have work. And then, of course, the barriers to them getting work. It's not that they don't want jobs, but they don't have high school diplomas, or they've been imprisoned and there are barriers there, or there are substance abuse issues that come up. And we were just starting to get our minds around this problem when Tom's organization made an incredible announcement that they were going to build a $30 million training facility for carpenters and millwrights at the end of our block. And so now, all of a sudden, opportunity, at least, is sort of presenting itself to our neighbors and to our project. Tom, I want you to talk about the decision to move this training facility into our neighborhood and talk some about the opportunities and the opportunity gaps that will exist for people who want to take advantage.
So the decision was pretty simple. Take a look around the city of Detroit, and there's cranes in the air, and we're building, and we're growing. And like any organization, you need to maintain or improve your own infrastructure. So we had 2 training centers in Warren, and one in Ferndale and one in Warren, and we were looking at consolidation and improvement of that. And we started researching the geographical area into what would make sense when the mayor and the community said to us, you know, we have all of these challenges, many of these barriers we just talked about, like access and transportation and vocational schools within the city. So we began many years ago working with those vocational programs, as I mentioned, with that Career Connections program, and providing additional training, working with community groups, pre-training programs, helmets to hard hats for military. We work with the Department of Corrections, so many of the same hurdles. And we said, well, where would make sense? And for us, there was just no better solution than in the city where the work will be and where the future workforce currently lives. There's the changing demographic in construction, like many of the other industries, and we needed to address that. So again, I want to make very clear that the difference in our organization is we have that partnership. We're co-managed with labor and management. So that partnerships that you talked about in the industry, we have a decided advantage. We have that. So the decision, of course, has to be funded. And then, so we sat down with our community partners and said what makes sense for us in the community. We sat down with our industry partners and what makes sense for us to invest. And we said, well, it's ours. We build things, so we will. And we invested, actually, we just negotiated contractors in southeastern Michigan with over 300 contributing employers and increased our allocation to our training program, which will put our annual budget somewhere near $10 million. But the initial cost of the building will be substantially more than that, right? About $30 million. The difference there is that it's not a one-time cost. There is no perfect training for construction because, like all of these other industries, whatever we train in today, technology changes tomorrow. So because we're co-managed, the curriculum that we teach in those skills for the jobs that those men and women have today while they get that training, sometimes it's hard for traditional academics to get their heads around this, but we don't train people that don't have a job. You have to have the hands that match the mind. So while we train policy or procedure and theory and principle in a classroom setting, we're extremely kinesthetic by nature. All the building trades are, and we have to build it. So our men and women actually have jobs while they get the training. Think about how that impacts the ability to overcome those hurdles. How do you pay that sitter? How do you get that transportation? You have to have that job that supports it. You have to have jobs that pay a living wage. You have to have opportunities for people to get in and honorably and respectfully earn their increases through training and through their profession. And so, you know, this was a no-brainer for us, but I think the biggest thing that the Carpenters are doing today is that we recognize that we build buildings, right? So many of our men and women have their identity by what they drive down the street and they say to their son or their daughter, I built that stadium, I built that hospital, I built that school. What we're starting to do today in an impactful way is to realize that the most important things that we build are our members and our communities and the culture that says that people are more important than things. And so we're making the commitment right now to make this investment because we believe that we'll continue to pay back our community and our members for decades to come.
And so, I mean, imagine in this neighborhood where there is no such thing as opportunity. I mean, we talk about that all the time. All the opportunity that existed when I was a kid growing up there is gone. It's either gone because of depopulation or deindustrialization, the changes in the auto industry, all of those things. And now we've got this tremendous opportunity, literally steps away from where everyone lives. But we've got a challenge. Most of our neighbors, if we sent them down to this new facility when it opened at this point, wouldn't be qualified for the work. There would be some sort of barrier. And so, you know, we've kind of pivoted the way we think about this and our work now to think about, okay, let's make sure that by the time this facility opens, which is still a few years away, we've got a mechanism and systems in place to address those deficits. And I feel like this is kind of a microcosm of the discussion that needs to take place across the city. Every neighborhood's not going to get a facility like this at the end of their block, but every neighborhood needs to be thinking about how to make their neighbors ready for these kinds of opportunities. This is the next phase of this rebirth that we're talking about in Detroit, and it's probably the most important phase. It's the opportunity phase. It's the one that takes people from poverty and dependency to independence and earning. And we're not terribly ready for it in a lot of cases. In about 10 minutes, we're going to take audience questions. But before we get to that, I want Andy and Dave especially to talk about how we change some of the criteria, I guess, that we're using to decide who's ready for what. I think it's really important to, of course, get people ready for these opportunities, but there's some things that we're doing and that we're asking of people that I think seem maybe a little unfair. Andy, I'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And to think about the folks in your old neighborhood, Stephen, I would say that traditionally, our education system did not see that those folks were part of their responsibility, right? Like those folks had their chance, they kind of went, whether they completed their secondary education or not. We kind of guaranteed everybody in this country at least a chance at a secondary education. And after that, we pretty much said, like, from there on, you're pretty much on your own. We do have some robust post-secondary education programs in this country. They tend to focus on folks who are kind of going from high school to college full-time. And so I think it's not as much about, it is about trying to get our systems to recognize that we should be investing in the skills of everybody in this country wherever they are, and to recognize it's going to be a diversity of things that they're going to need. Some are going to need technical training. Some are going to need those foundational skills and some reinforcement. It's better if we give it to them both at the same time. Like, these are folks who want to get into a job, so give it to me all at once, right? Give me the support services that's going to help me not just to get to class, but it's going to help me stay on the job and succeed. When we talk to small companies about the new interest in apprenticeship, what they're most concerned about is we want to have good pre-apprenticeship programs to make sure that folks are qualified to walk onto my job site. But what I'm most concerned about is how is it I know that that person is going to be working with me 18 months, 2 years from now? And so we're now working with states around the country to create these things called work-based learning support funds. So a set of resources that is there not just to get person to the first day of work, but to keep them on that job so they're learning and earning and succeeding, solving some of those childcare and transportation and other kinds of issues. That's just something that our workforce and education systems have been slow to respond to those sets of needs. But we're going to need everybody in this country skilled to fill one of those jobs. We are leaving economic growth on the table because we're not investing in everybody at that level. So let's change that. Let's change about how we think about when we fund somebody's going to college, a community college or a post-secondary program. We have very traditional ways. We're going to have somebody go for 600 hours sitting in a classroom. That's the way that you qualify for a Pell Grant. Why not make it easier for somebody who can go to a shorter-term program with a group of employers at the end of that program and say, yes, if that person completes this shorter-term program, we will hire them or we will advance them. We will certainly give them a job interview. Why not make Pell Grants, workforce Pell as we sometimes call it, or short-term Pell, more available to people for whom that's the better result, as opposed to thinking about giving them support if they're going to sit in a full-time program for 4 years. So, for instance, in DC now, Congressman Andy Levin is leading the fight for the Jobs Act, which is an effort to change the structure of the Pell Grant program specifically to help working people get in and out of college quickly while they're still holding down a job, either as an apprentice or in some other context, so they can continue to advance their skills, but in doing it in a way that meets them at where they are, not getting them to meet the sets of standards that traditional education institutions have set for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Dave, we've all heard the discussion about ban the box as a way of eliminating barriers to people getting jobs, but I feel like there are still other things that maybe don't make so much sense that we put in front of folks and say, well, this is the reason that you can't get into this program, or this is the reason you can't have that job. Talk about how the Workforce Development Board is confronting those things.
Well, at the Workforce Development Board, I think we are working with the large companies to say that we need to change the way we think about training people, starting in the career and technical schools and high school. We need to think differently about how we interview, how we hire. This idea of wraparound services. 5 years ago, if you told me that companies would actually bring social workers into the workplace to help with onboarding and getting people set up right on their job, that now is becoming commonplace. The language equity and inclusion is now showing up in the CEO suites where people are saying, listen, we can stay on the path we were on, and there will be a whole set of a population that's just going to be passed over and never get a job. We are going to have to be mindful and thoughtful and go about doing things differently. And if we do that, we are going to, again, get a great source of employees. Now, the backdrop on this is that companies like DTE, half of our employees are going to retire in the next 5 years. And we're not the only one. And then we have all these large infrastructure projects that are coming on. So getting people to broaden their thinking about about diversity and inclusion, and who haven't they traditionally sought as an employee, and then how can we go about doing that, whether it be returning citizens or people with disabilities also. But on returning citizens, just to give you an example, one of the things we're doing is we cannot find tree trimmers, and trimming trees is really important to your electric reliability. So on any given day, we have 1,000 people trimming trees, Consumers has another 1,000, and then you have all these private contractors. We have 300 openings right now, and we cannot find people to come in. At the same time, everyone is out there looking for work. So again, we could just do what we've done in the past to say, if I need 300, go interview 1,500 and find 300. We're going to do two things. One is we're standing up a tree trimming school in the state prison. So the people will be trained while they're in prison and have a job when they come out. And then we're going to do similar to what was described here. We're going to stand up a Detroit-based tree trimming school, which will give people a path to a job, but also give us a path to diversity that we don't have today, because many of the professions, you don't see the diversity that we should be seeing.
Michelle, you talked about some of the preparation barriers, I guess, that exist to people going to community college, people who are not reading on the proper grade level, people who can't do math at the same grade level. Talk about how you guys deal with that at the community college level, but how maybe you reach down below as well and support K-12 doing a better job with that.
Well, I can talk about a couple things. One of the things is setting up competency-based, traditionally based, it's a little bit different than traditionally based developmental education. We found at the community college that when you put developmental education in place and it hasn't been necessarily competency-based, it doesn't make a difference in the grade point average of a student. That's a big realization, not just for our college, but for a lot of other community colleges. What we found that has worked well is contextualized learning and really putting those skill sets and infusing them in with what they're learning in a hands-on environment, kind of what you're talking about, as one opportunity. Another opportunity is meeting a student or a potential student where they're at, assessing them and letting them move through the curriculum as fast or as slow as they need to be able to get through different concepts, right? So that's really about teacher facilitation, where maybe you have computers set up and it allows a student to work through machine-based learning, and it'll stop them when something's not right, and it'll go back a few steps, rehearse again with them what the piece is, and then allow them to move forward. And then there's an instructor in the classroom that, rather than try to move every student the same way, like a bunch of widgets, through a system, that you allow them to move as quickly or as slowly as they need to, because everybody has difficulties in different places, right? So it's really responding to the needs of the person as it's customized to the needs of the person. And I think that, again, the real secret here is competency-based, and it's really this piece where you start to move it in, the complexity, you move it into the instruction itself.
Tom, you said something to me before we started about failure and how you meet failure when somebody can't qualify for a job or a training opportunity, that you don't have to close the door on that person, that maybe you say, all right, well, you didn't get it this time, but let's talk about how we get you to that space.
Yes, so in our organization, we're a vast network of men and women that work in the trades, so we become the infrastructure that how you go to work, and we're working closely with our men and women on mentoring programs that take candidates that might not come through the door fully prepared, but become a mentor to them. So we have mentorship in membership at our journeyman level. We have mentorship at our apprenticeship level. When a young man or woman walks through the door and struggles with our entry test, because remember, you know, we're an educational provider accredited by the DOL, and so we have certain standards, and those standards are not always easily achievable. So when the man or woman walks through the door and they don't do so well on their test, it doesn't have to end. He's already in our house. He or she wants to live in the trades, and we can help them get over that hurdle. So some of the ways we do that. So I'm not a traditional educator, K through 12, but I have a ton of community partners that are, right? We have places where we can house them. We can bring tutoring right to them. We can give them times and opportunities to retake those tests. But we work with community partners. right? So for example, right now, this summer we'll actually run a career fair where we work with Michigan Works, who can also help do those things. They work on everything from application building, resume building to GEDs. And so that's one way we can overcome those hurdles. But community partners are the third leg of our stools. We have industry and our construction partners, we as the labor organization, and the community. And ultimately, if you employ those three legs of that stool, you'll have a firm place to sit. And that's what we're counting on, is our community partners to help us overcome those things. But we're taking responsibility of that. And we're creating mentoring programs with our men and women in our current programs to say that if you want someone to be in these jobs behind you to carry on our legacy, it's your responsibility to help them. And so that's what we're doing.
Okay, let's take audience questions. We have a microphone. Greg has the mic.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris Marshall with Winning Futures. Dave, my question is for you. As you're taking a look at the massive gaps you're going to have in employment, do you see the company make any changes to the education levels that are required? So if a job traditionally required a bachelor's, are you looking at saying, well, you know what, we could get somebody in with this associates, and then we would have to train them in these areas in order to start filling some of those spots?
But actually what you're hearing across all companies, not just DTE, when we get together with the large employers, their language is high school plus, and understanding that we are evolving into a world where high school with some amount of technical training or certificates is really the skills that will be needed. And then also the language of lifelong learning. So that high school plus might work today, but with technology and other changes, we're going to have to create a structure to support people for ongoing lifelong learning. But you know, I think one of the messages that we've sent out too is that there are a lot of skilled trades and other jobs that you don't have to go to higher education. High school and apprenticeship is great. Many go on to higher education, and that's good also. But there are really good paying jobs that in the skilled trades area. We have massive shortages right now, and that's going to continue to grow. So I think you're going to see employers, when we had an excess supply of candidates, you could set these high standards, and the language was, we're going to hire the best and brightest. And now when people can't find labor, it's forcing everyone to rethink, how do we deal with kids that are struggling in high school? And not let them fail and drop out, but give them a mentor, a coach, and get them in an apprenticeship program, and then continue support for lifelong learning.
Back there.
Hi, I'm Andrea Schroeder. I'm a state rep from the 43rd District, and this question is really for the Carpenters. One of the school districts in my district has a robust construction technology program. It's 9 through 12, and next year it's expanding to 6 through 12. One of our greatest issues is with the juniors and the seniors, when they're learning whether it's carpentry, HVAC, electric, is when we're trying to get them into the apprentice programs, they're not 18. Can you talk about, with the advances in safety technology and things like that, if you, your trades, what you've talked about, so we can get these kids who are learning in the classroom but can't be on site, how we can help improve that so when they graduate or they have a 13th year, they've got a lifelong career.
So this is a challenge for construction, and always has been. Safety is the very first class you'll get from us, and I'm sure it does in your vocational training too. So we take the responsibility of putting men and women on construction sites very seriously. So let me start there. But we realize that be competitive and to develop these young men and women who want to be here but have this real legal challenge. We have to find a solution. So I'll give you an example of what we're doing today. I mentioned the summer camp that's being hosted in Ferndale this year, and we'll be breaking that into our new Wayland School just outside of Grand Rapids in the fall. The goal here is to run summer camps, and we partner with Michigan Works. We partner with SEMCA, Southeastern Michigan Community Alliance, please excuse me if I got that wrong, to foster grants to pay these young men and women to come in during this time and do construction projects in real life in our facilities where they can be overseen by safety, right? So we build projects. We build houses right inside of our facilities. We have 65,000 square feet in Wayland. We'll have 125 in the city. We can actually put them to work doing those jobs in safe environments to ensure when they really are ready to go, they walk out productive. but you're also not losing that person because of that hurdle of not being able to have that additional summer job right there, right? So that's how we're doing it. We're doing it with career fairs. We intend to have them around the state. Our first one will be this summer in Ferndale. So that's what we're doing specifically to address that. I'd be happy to talk with you further. We have 112 high schools or ISDs that employ our curriculum. So we'll work with you specifically if we need to. Maybe we can host something in-house at a local training center.
I'm Eric Looper with the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. My question, for the longest time, besides the skill level, we've always worried about drug tests, right? And now with marijuana being legalized in the state, how are you as employers or thinking about workforce issues, how are you navigating this? Are we bending the rules and thinking about marijuana in different ways, or does that continue to be an impediment to finding the workforce that we need?
I could go first. We are not bending the rules. And just like you just heard, safety is job number one, and we will not compromise and put employees or coworkers to risk. And in addition to just, I think, a principle around that a lot of businesses have stood tall on, we also have federally regulated jobs that not only you're getting drug tested on the way in, you're going to get periodic drug testing. So we need a culture of safety and people showing up to work not impaired.
Go ahead. I would mirror that. We absolutely have standards, and they will be enforced. But we have a responsibility not just to the person's personal freedoms, but to the men and women that work around them. And our construction sites are very few are standalone one-employee sites. So we have a very specific responsibility to that, and it must be upheld. And safety and the welfare of people must come first.
Carla Walker Miller Energy Services. David, you're one of the few people who I've heard speak on a problem that we don't even address or recognize in our companies, and that's a high level of unemployment for the disabled community. You put us on a path of really looking at that, and I'd just like this group to have the benefit of a few sentences from you on that.
Well, we have a lot of our subsets of our population that just we've put barriers in place to make it really hard for them to find employment. We've talked a lot about returning citizens here already, but we have folks in the community of special abilities that the percentages of unemployment is just staggering. So in the autism community, it's 90%. I think if you went into the community of people without sight, it's similar type things. And again, companies in the past had not broadened their definition of inclusion and diversity to say this could be a great source of employees. We need to change the way we hire, interview, place, train, including training supervisors and coworkers. So the positive thing here is there are a lot of companies that are really stepping into this to say, not only do we have an obligation to do this, it's a great source of employees, but we have to change the way we think about the employment process, including the hiring and onboarding. But thanks, Carla.
Good afternoon, Dan Varner with Goodwill Industries of Greater Detroit. And just given that exchange, just have to say, proud employer of a gentleman with autism, one of our subsidiaries that just got promoted to a crew leader position, doing industrial recycling, actually Greenworks, so does a lot of work with DTE Energy. So appreciate your leadership, Dave.
Thanks, Dan.
And Colleen's yours on this issue. So I kind of want to raise an issue that, I want to raise a specific portion of an issue that I think Stephen's question earlier kind of pointed to, but nobody mentioned, and that is adult education. So a lot of the so you just said it, Dave, diploma plus, right? And a lot of the folks who we serve at Goodwill, who others serve, who live on Tuxedo, so on and so forth, don't have a high school diploma. Adult education funding in the state is woefully low. There are precious few federal funds available to support adult education. Would all of you or any of you, Andy, maybe you in particular, if you've seen anything around the country, just talk a little bit about what other states are doing in the adult ed space that we might do in Michigan in order to improve adult ed outcomes?
Well, sure, I'll lead off. So you're absolutely right. I mean, if you're really this is kind of like the unacknowledged barrier, the structural barrier. We have many structural barriers that are preventing folks to get into good jobs or advance good jobs. But this issue of foundational skills, which we spend virtually nothing on at the federal level. It's one title within the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. This is the thing that is holding back tens of millions of folks in this labor market from getting a good job or advancing to a self-supporting career. I think that the future work conversation, ironically, has kind of put this onto a slightly different platform now, because the concerns about digital literacy, which digital literacy is just on the continuum of reading, math, has got a lot of current employers concerned about the preparation of their current workforce moving into the future, about whether or not they're going to be ready to harness some of these technologies. Good workers, talented workers, but if you think in healthcare, just use that as an example, or retail or a lot of service sector, it's 60 to 70% below functional, being able to take your first post-secondary course in a lot of those because of limited foundational skills. And so I think that those industries are recognizing, oh, we've got a problem with our current people. And that's also a problem for people who are not currently working or not working effectively. So one, we need to make this a much bigger part of the future work conversation, which there's a future work event every other week in Washington, D.C., but this is one of the things that does not get talked about a lot. In terms of what other states are doing, so some states are putting their own money in at higher levels. Some states are looking at how it is that they're leveraging more resources out of their K-12 systems. So you have a series of adult schools now that are basically being funded at the same FTE level as somebody who's a young person who's in one of those schools, but they're specifically set up around the needs of adults, and is providing both the foundational skills as well as the technical training that's getting them into a job or keeping them in a job. I think this is an opportunity that particularly for people who did not get a very good shot the first time around at a decent K-12 education, I feel like it's still on that system to figure out how to better serve a larger number of those folks moving forward. So I think that's something that we're also looking at in a number of different states around the country.
Anyone else on that?
I would just say that at Washtenaw, what we're doing is we're marrying certificate programs with adult education. So as we end up, our levels are very high in the state in terms of our success by doing that. And I think that it's the opportunity to bring them up to a point where then you can finally start to train them. So it's kind of like middle college in a way, where you take high school students and then you marry them, and in an extra year they've got the associate degree. We're doing the same thing with adult education, but marrying them with a certificate program to get them on the path to some type of a credential, and to keep moving them through to get them to the associate degree. And that's been, it's been good for them from the perspective that it's contextualized, and it's been good for them for the fact that they seem more motivated to be able to move through, because they can see the end in sight towards a job.
I might just add one quick thing. Sometimes people don't complete their high school or GEDs because they don't see the reason why.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we do is work with them, and if that's a barrier, try to employ them during the time, give them that first 3 to 6 months to complete that program. Have some flexibility there. The most important thing is the mentoring thing, where someone sits down and says, if you get here, we can get there. And then as far as adult education, we have articulation agreements with local community college that create career-long paths, not just superintendent and foreman training, which we do in-house, but associate's degree in justice, or construction management and things like that, both at the community college level and some universities.
Do we have any more questions? Oh, there you go.
Hi, my name is Ron Hendricks. I'm the president of the Southern Wayne County Regional Chamber. And I just wanted to ask the panel, if you could for a moment focus on this small business community, maybe particularly retail and restaurants and so forth. The talent gap is very serious for that industry as well. And our chamber, we've hosted many diversity and inclusion workshops, which I really like that you've been hitting on that. We've had Dan Varder come and speak and talk about what Goodwill is doing among other nonprofits and different organizations. But a lot of our small business members particularly are looking for administrative assistants, retail clerks, those kinds of things. What suggestions do you have for small business owners? What kind of resources can they find, and how can we as a chamber provide them with those resources?
I can speak to that from Ann Arbor. The CBB is working with the Ann Arbor Chamber And we have the same issue in restaurants and hospitality, et cetera. And we decided that, you know, for economic development to truly happen, you need the three-legged stool. We can't do it on our own. We need education, we need government, and we need business and industry to come together and create the solution. And that is what's happening right now in Ann Arbor. As we speak, there was just a challenge grant application for the greater Ann Arbor region that came through from a private small company to be able to create transportation from Ypsilanti to Ann Arbor, to be able to transport in vans people back and forth to the restaurant industry all times during the day and during the evening. Because as they're prepping, they stay late into the night, you know, prepping for the next day at Zingerman's or any of those particular places. So that's a particular thing that he's doing. They're working also with the community college from the training perspective, because it's not always about a college credit degree, folks. It's not always about a college credit program. Sometimes it's a training program that leads to an industry-based credential that creates the career pathway and keeps moving people up that ladder. And they're working with us from the training end to get people the basic credentials for the industry, Serve Safe, and some of those to be able to work in the restaurants. But then also working with the College Credit Culinary Program so that hopefully for some of those that are going to get through, they've got great mentors and they like that work, they can work their way through the associate degree or even a certificate in culinary so that they can continue to keep stacking on those credentials and keep moving towards even higher not just degree programs, but also opportunities within the industry itself. So it's really taken the three of us to come together to say, okay, Michigan Works is going to pay for this piece. You guys are going to create the training that's needed both on the non-credit and the college credit side, and we're going to bring business and industry in from the private sector, not only to supply the jobs, but also to help supply a transportation opportunity.
All right, the red light is flashing at me, so we are out of time. I want to thank all of our guests for being here, and thanks to the Wilson Foundation for their sponsorship of this panel.
Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way to the theater.